That's perfect.
So, hi, my name's Sam. I've been doing a PhD here in Jersey for the past almost 4 years now, looking at biodiversity and socioeconomic impacts of the establishment of MPAs. But I'm going to give a quick, it's been through the University of Plymouth and facilitated by Government of Jersey Marine Resources team and funded by Blue Marine Foundation. I'll give a quick overview of why I'm doing this research and the importance of the marine environment, and then explain a couple of my chapters and how it feeds into marine management here. So we are connected by biodiversity. That's the first link to this conference. So people are a part of ecosystems, and ecosystem services are the benefits that we get from the ecosystems. So it could be provisioning services, so what we can eat from the marine environment, but could also be cultural services or recreational, or some other form of benefit that we get from it, and less tangible things such as climate regulation. So there is biodiversity and habitat loss that is affecting the ability of these ecosystems to support our well-being. So this can be in the form of pollution. Climate change is impacting the ability of some habitats, such as to store carbon through, so things like fishing and fishing damage can impact or reduce the amount of carbon that certain habitats can store. So that's impacting their ability to mitigate climate change. And this, I'm going to focus on the fishery impacts. That's what I've been looking at, but there are lots of other human impacts that can cause those. So there are different types of fishery impacts. So mobile fishing, which is things such as dredging and trawling; static fishing, so set pots, fish traps, set nets; and diving practices, so these sort of lower impact, where they're not really impacting on the seabed. You're just you're selecting the species and the target species that you want to sell. And then low water fishing, which is a fairly big one here as well. And these all have their own impacts on the marine biodiversity, some more than others, and the ones that damage the seabed or have gear going on the seabed will be the ones that are having the biggest impact. So there are different ways of mitigating this, and it can be, for certain fisheries, it might be more of a species specific mitigation, so by changing the gear that you're using to make it less effective, or to reduce the mortality or bycatch of certain species. But in terms of wider ecosystem approach, making sure that you're considering the whole sort of ecosystem in which the fishery species exist in, you can use marine protected areas. So that's a spatial form of management where certain human activities will be restricted, and there are calls for this to be a more holistic approach to this, because at the moment, especially in the UK, a lot of marine protected areas are only feature based. So there's only, within the MPA boundary, only the species or the habitat of concern, the one that's considered to be the most vulnerable, that's the only one that will be protected, whereas fishing may continue still within the boundary but outside of the protected features. But all of the habitats will have an input into biodiversity. They will all be contributing to the recovery of the marine environment. So there have been, there's been a lot of research recently to try and improve, or to understand the benefit of protecting more than one habitat. And this falls in line with the ecosystem-based approach. So it's when the whole ecosystem is considered. So it's not just that fish, you're not just looking at the level of landings of that fish, or how you can improve the sustainability of that one species. It's what is needed to support that whole fishery from the base up. And then also how can we sustainably use that ecosystem to support societal values. So it's taking into account the human side as well, because we can't manage ecosystems, we can only manage the activities that are going into that or affecting that environment. And this is where whole site approach MPAs come in. So that's an MPA where all of the habitats within the boundary are afforded the same level of protection, particularly from bottom toad fishing. And this can have a range of impacts, but the the research on these has been fairly limited because we don't have very many MPAs that are of this high level that have also been monitored for a long time. So we're not sure what the recovery trends are. We don't know at the point where biodiversity reaches a plateau. So in Lyme Bay, where they've been surveying the MPA there, which where all dredging is excluded from the boundary, they've yet to reach a plateau of biodiversity. 13 years later, it's still increasing. So it shows that the baseline for what we understand the biodiversity should be has been shifted massively by fishing activities. And so that's just a very quick background of how I've gone to the point of where I've been doing the research in Jersey. So we have whole site MPAs here in Jersey. You see them on the map there. All of those areas that are at the polygons that are outlined in black, those are all areas where mobile gear such as dredging and trawling are excluded. And we have a network of them, and it's a really good way forward for protecting marine biodiversity. And so I'm going to go over the socioeconomic side first, and then I've got some more, more ecology side later, which will probably be more interesting to most of the group here. Got some interesting footage as well. So this follows a paper that I've recently submitted. Hopefully we'll get some reviewer comments back soon. But it's looking at how all the different habitats together are supporting fisheries and the value that's associated with those habitats. So I'm sure you all know where Jersey is, but we have 6.5% of our territorial waters protected by MPAs, and yeah, they're all using the whole site approach. And how do these contribute to fisheries? So the methods used to try and understand, or trying to relate habitat to fisheries in a more integrated way, we've determined the key fisheries that Jersey fisheries depend on, and using their landing weight and the primary sale of that species, worked out the landings value each year. We've also incorporated the French landings to try and get a more overall picture of the value of landings that are coming out of Jersey's territorial waters, and then calculated the habitat area using the habitat map that was created by Paul Chambers, and using the literature, we've assigned habitats. We assigned a value to each habitat across all of the habitats that that species used in its life cycle. So all of those habitats contribute to the final value, because without one, it can't get to the next stage of its life cycle. And then we've distributed that across all of the habitats and made them come up with values based on that. So this is just going over the main fisheries. So it's the first 5 that I've focused on. So they're all shellfish. We're mainly a shellfish dependent fishery here. So we've got whelk, brown crab, scallop, lobster, and spider crab. And then the graph on the right shows the value per year. This is averaged over a 4-year period from 2015 to 2019. So you can see that lobster is the biggest earner for the Jersey fleet, but for France actually it's more scallop, spider crab, and whelk. So the different dependence, or the levels of dependence across the nations, will have implications for which habitats are supporting those fisheries, or have the most value to that fishery. And then the habitat associations is just, it's a literature review. There are still gaps in this, and they're quite broad habitats that we've grouped them into, just because we don't have the finer scale information about where each of these species are spending in their life cycle. Things like scallop are easier, they're sedentary, they're not moving about so much. So once they've settled somewhere, they're not going to go too far. So they're in a smaller range of habitats. But the more information we have about habitat associations, the better, the more accurate these models can be. And just a quick graph to show you some of the results. So the value will change depending on the national, the sort of the market demand for that species in that nation, the more money that's worth, the more each of its habitats going to be worth, because they've been split equally across. But because the various habitats are protected in different proportions within the MPAs, so things like seagrass are pretty much all contained within MPAs, so any species that's relying on seagrass has more of its value protected by MPAs. So the hatched area shows how much of that habitat value is currently safeguarded from fishing pressures through the MPAs. There's quite a lot going on this graph as well, and also the less habitats the species uses, the more of that value is split across those two habitats. So it could be that for certain fishery species you need to focus more of your management on those habitats, but if you're taking into account the whole fishery, all of the habitats in Jersey's waters are being used at some stage by one of them. So it's having that connectivity between the habitats is going to be really important for allowing the survival from one life stage to the next to support the adult populations. And yes, so the landings are worth around 11 million a year to Jersey, but also 7 million is coming out from French landings or from French fisheries, and about 4.5 million is safeguarded within the MPAs, within the habitats that are supporting that. And yeah, multiple habitats contributing to the values. That's the key message there. And I'm going to quickly skim through to the next section, taking quite a while.
No, Sam, you've got time.
I've got time, okay. So the management implications is this is supporting the why we need whole site MPAs, why we need to take the ecosystem approach, not just for biodiversity, but also for fisheries. But the next section will go over why it's also good for biodiversity, not just economically. So this is more biodiversity related. So we used beta videos to look at mobile species assemblages in the MPAs across a range of sites inside and outside the MPAs on comparable depths and habitat structures, habitat compositions, using beta videos like this, where it's just a camera on a pole and there'll be bait at the end. I've got a couple of videos because I've been talking for a while now, so it'd be quite nice for you guys to watch something a bit more interesting. So there'll be bait and cage, and we will watch the videos to see what species are attracted to this. It won't give you the whole assemblage because not all species will be attracted to bait, especially it's more the scavenger and predatory species that we'll get. But you do get the other species coming over just because they're interested in the commotion that's going on around the cage. And this doesn't give an absolute measure of abundance. It's a relative measure. So we would measure or record the maximum number of each individual species at any one time on the video. So if I saw 5 cat sharks on the video, if one swims away and another one comes back, I wouldn't then count. They all have to be on screen at the same time, so you're not accidentally recounting the same individual. But then if you're using that for comparative purposes, that's fine. That's a bullhuss that's trying to eat that bit of bait. It makes it very fun watching during the analysis stage. And yeah, not very much. And that was an unusual visitor that we had. Is a two-banded bream, which is a Mediterranean species that I think might be coming up from the south. Again, there's another big bullhuss, and a few cat sharks about, and bream. We always get bream and cat sharks and spider crabs almost on every video. They're very, very common here. But you get the odd extra visitor. There should be one about to come in. There you go, just coming in from the back there. Is that's a taupe, and we actually get 2 come up on this video. Oh no, just the one. But at this site we had 2 taupe hanging around for about half an hour, which is really cool to see because sharks are really good indicators of ecosystem health, and they're one of the higher trophic species. So few of the results. Taxa, so the diversity was greater in the MPAs than outside, but the abundance, there wasn't really a significant difference there. So that it could be that it's more to do with the assemblages that are being supported rather than the number of individuals. The assemblages were different for all locations. So Echoes, Minkies and Southeast were the locations considered both inside and outside protected areas. And I'll go through some of these quickly with the indicator species. So spider crab was picked out because it's a commercial species that regularly appears on beta videos. So things like lobster and crab won't, lobster and brown crab are more nocturnal, so we don't get them very often on the beta videos. And also scallop and whelk aren't mobile enough to appear on these videos. But spider crab appeared quite a lot, but there was no real discernible difference. Actually, probably at the Echoes in the Southeast, we actually saw more spider crab outside the MPAs than inside. At the Minkies, slightly more inside. But this is probably due to the fact that actually the main pressure on spider crab is potting activities, and they aren't restricted inside the MPAs. So just protecting the habitats themselves for species that are highly targeted using other methods won't be enough to protect that species, but it will give them the basis that they need for a healthy ecosystem. But for species such as wrasse that are very associated with complex habitats, very territorial, there's far more of them in the MPAs than in the open controls. Saw very few wrasse outside. This is all the wrasse species lumped into one group, and that was across all the locations. So it could just be that the habitats are more stable or more complex in the MPAs. That's allowing them to have sort of like a home range within the MPAs. And similarly for bream, they're also associated with more complex habitats, especially with seagrass. You get lots more in seagrass compared to bare sediment. And there was slightly more on the adults, but with the juveniles, there was far more inside. So it could be that the MPAs are more of a nursery area for bream. And then sharks and rays, we've got 2 slides left. Sharks and rays, we have some IUCN threatened and vulnerable species here. I split them out into sharks and rays. There weren't really enough to do any formal statistics on these. Are quite low numbers. 8 was the highest number we had for sharks, and that was inside the MPAs. It could be that the range or the replicates we're doing aren't enough to detect what the difference is inside outside. The rays were actually there was a few more outside than inside. So it could just be that that's because they're scavenger species. They're going into the flatter areas, and they might be eating the anything that's left over from dredging activities, or if there's dead or detritus there for them to eat. Whereas the sharks will go for more where there's hotspots of fish because they're more predatory rather than scavenger, especially the things like the species such as taupe. And the importance of all this, I've got one more video to end on, is understanding species distributions is really important for their management. If you don't know what habitats they're using or where they're going, it's going to make it really hard to manage them effectively. Especially, this is especially important for trying to understand where juvenile habitats are. Because means you can also protect that at the right time of year, or if there's an area where species are going to spawn, that's or there'll be high priority for conservation. And again, all this information would improve the habitat valuation model from earlier. If we can pinpoint or make more accurate habitat associations, we can spread that data across more habitats rather than the broad ones that have been used at the moment. And this has been funded by lots of people, and it's been a long project, and there's been lots of help from various organisations. The beta video data in particular, Jersey Marine Conservation, Kevin on his boat a lot to get at that. And it's been a good 4 years. Does anyone have any questions?